I'd like to welcome Simon Halls. Thanks ever so much for coming to speak to us today, Simon, on the Creatives Universe. We're going to be talking about publishing today, but I just wondered if you could maybe just outline a bit of your journalism history from BBC Southwest.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. Well, my journalism's been all over the place. When I joined the BBC, I worked in many different areas. That was London and Northern Ireland and across the UK and indeed Europe. And then I settled in the Southwest and stayed there for a few years. And I was working as a correspondent in environment and home affairs, which is largely politics and local government and police and courts and crime stuff. I also did some business and economics when we had the financial crash, because everybody was doing that at the time. And I left the BBC in 2017 after, I think, a career of about 25 years on and off with BBC, a bit of ITV, to come to Cambridge to fulfill a dream, which was to run my own company, which is Creative Warehouse, a business communications consultancy, and also to teach. I've always loved teaching. I believe in handing on knowledge, wisdom, information to the next generation. So I started teaching here at the University of Cambridge. I was asked to lead a course in communication skills, which has become the most successful on the university's online platform. I'm proud to say that's writing, public speaking, and storytelling skills. And then on top of that, because that was such a success, quick, get the plug for the book in, I was asked by Cambridge University Press, the publishing arm of the university, to write a book to go alongside the course. And here it is, Compelling Communication. And forgive me getting all excited about this, but this was only published last week, so it's my baby.
That's marvelous. So really, tell us how, because I know that you've written quite a lot of fiction and non-fiction books. So I just wondered if you could talk us through how you got into your crime fiction, where I think you particularly started writing.
Yeah, fiction, first of all. Well, I was attracted to crime because I was doing crime for the BBC, so I was reporting on real life crime, and I became fascinated by the battle of wits between detectives and criminals, and some of it you get a sense of on television and in books, but actually a lot of it is more subtle than that. They play clever little psychological tricks, and they do all sorts of things to get their man or woman. So I was fascinated by that. And of course, you don't have time to reflect that in a couple of minutes news report on the TV or the radio. So I thought, oh, I shall write a book about this. And so I came up with the idea of a character who was a journalist, a TV reporter, who not only covered crimes, but investigated them as well and helped the police to solve them. And I was really proud and pleased that people actually found it vaguely interesting and entertaining. And I ended up writing, I think, 7 novels on that subject, which was great.
Obviously, you've had a real window into psychology of how criminals' minds work.
Psychology is fascinating with these things.
Presumably, how did you get your first novel published? Because I think a lot of people will be watching this with a book inside them, not knowing how or where to start. So can you talk us through some of that?
Well, the first thing to do, I always say to people, and I've taught writing in quite a few places now, and I'm happy to say I've helped a fair few authors actually get published, achieve their dream. First thing I always say is don't put pressure on yourself. Write for yourself. If you feel the urge to write, write for yourself because you want to write. It's often said that you don't choose the story you write about, the story chooses you. And I think that's true. So try and find where your heart is, what it is that's really something that means a lot to you, that you're passionate about, that you want to write about. And then start writing about it. And consider it something that you do for your own fulfillment, but also while you're doing it, you're learning a little bit about the craft. Read around the craft of writing. On one level, it's very simple. You have people, characters doing things, stories in places, locations. So it's all about people, places, and plots. But then as you learn more about the art of writing, it's much, much more subtle than that. There are many, many depths to it about what you say and what you don't say. Particularly, I find fascinating the space you leave for imagination. Some writers, for example, describe their characters or pages, particularly the older fashioned writers will do that. They'll put pages of description about what their characters look like. Some will hardly describe them at all. There'll just be a line or two and leave it to the imagination. So within this apparently straightforward focus of places, people, and plots, there's so much subtlety to it. But you only find out about that by exploring it, practicing it, And it's a wonderfully fulfilling journey to learn.
That's really good. It's about getting real, getting involved. And what about, let's say, for argument's sakes, you've managed to write a book, you've managed to get a contract with a traditional publishing house. What does the campaign trail look like? What's expected of you as an author? Because most creatives I speak to, when I put a camera on them, shy away from it, and they're really not keen to put themselves forward.
Yeah, and I understand that, because writing can be a very solitary thing. You're creating your worlds in your own office, in your own room. And then when it comes to talking about it, it can be intimidating. It can be scary. But I would say, if you think that you will get published and then the publishers will give you millions of pounds in marketing budget and 20 people to support you, and you'll get a red carpet wherever you go, and only certain coloured M&Ms and all that sort of thing that people fantasize about in the celebrity world, it's not like that these days. One of the most common questions you'll be asked as an aspiring author on your application, your submission, is, what's your social media following like? How many Twitter followers or X followers? How many Instagram followers have you got? Because it's important that you can do your own marketing as well. So publishers these days look to you to do some of the heavy lifting as well. There are marketing budgets and there are people to help you, but you will always be much more popular and much more likely to be taken on by a publisher, and much more likely to succeed as an author if you can do some of your own marketing as well. And that means going out and promoting. It means doing talks in libraries, talks to book groups, talks at festivals. It means doing social media about what you're writing, what you're thinking, what your characters are doing. It means doing news interviews with your local paper, radio station. It means having to, I sometimes think, put on a confidence suit. You might not be the most confident person in the world, but if you put on this confidence suit, today I'm in writer mode and it's being like Superman. You take off the boring old other suit that you're wearing and you put on the writer suit and you go out and be a writer. And that's one way I find which is useful to help people cope with that expectation.
That's really great, actually. I think that gives people some really solid ideas on what they need to do as an individual and the attributes that they need to take on. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages? Because there's a lot, there seem to be mainly two routes of traditional publishing and self-publishing. So can you talk us through some of the pros and cons?
Yeah, always go for the traditional publisher if you can, simply because they have got more resources behind you. If you self-publish, you will get your work out there, but it is much, much harder to actually get any traction, to get any interest in it. Traditional publishers have huge marketing lists, they have access to bookshops, they usually have their own social media platforms, they have agreements with literary festivals to get authors there, they have contacts. So it's generally much better to go by the conventional publishing route, but it is hard to get there. It's a very demanding, very competitive industry, writing. My own agent, although he's a relatively small agent, he gets around 10 manuscripts a day submitted to him saying, will you represent me? So that's 300 a month, and he'll only probably take on 1 or 2 people a year. So that gives you an idea, and that's one of the smaller agents. So it is competitive, but always aim first of all at the bigger publishers, because that will be much more effective for you. However, if that doesn't work out for you, you can make it work with a personal publishing route, with publishing yourself. But nonetheless, it can be much, much harder work.
Okay, and what about the matter of intellectual property? Most creatives that I speak to are fairly clued up on intellectual property. So, as far as I'm aware, traditional publishing will want to try and take as much intellectual property as possible. I don't know. What's your comment on that?
Well, your intellectual property, your work is your work. If you look at the start of a book, for example, it will be copyrighted to you, but obviously you have then signed a contract with the publisher that they have certain rights over it as well. And that normally means you can't do anything with it unless they agree as well. And if you're lucky, that might be things like film rights, it might well be audiobook rights, things like that. Normally you will work in harmony on those things. But fundamentally, your intellectual property, your creation, your characters, your stories, they are yours. And you can then decide who to work with, whether it's a publisher, whether it's a video company on those. But the fundamentals of it is what goes on in your head. You create those characters, you create those stories. That therefore is yours unless you wish to sign it away.
Let's say if I wanted to get a book published, what would be the 3 recommendations that you would give to me and others like me of how to get published?
The first one is to learn your craft. When I first decided I wanted to be a writer, I thought, oh, this won't be too hard. I'm a BBC journalist, can't be tricky. I wrote a book, I put it out there to various agents, and they all turned it down. Oh, oh, well, obviously that must be their fault. They could not possibly be thinking I wasn't up to it. They just were missing out on my genius. So I wrote another book, and guess what? Same thing happened. That got turned down as well. And then I started to realize actually writing was harder than it looked, which was annoying. But then the third time I wrote, I'd learned from the first 2 versions. And this time I got an agent, and this time I got a publisher. So the first point is it's hard work. People have got this wonderful myth about writing that you just sit down and the words flow out. Well, maybe some days, but a lot of days it's really, really hard work. But the great Ernest Hemingway put it beautifully. He said, writing is easy. Just sit down at a typewriter, laptop these days, and bleed. And he was absolutely right. Absolutely right. So first of all, put in the work. Do not expect to be a brilliant writer overnight. Like everything, I'm afraid, it takes work. Secondly, be persistent. If I'd have given up after books 1 or 2, I'd never been published, but I'm bloody minded and sometimes stupid. So you've got to be persistent. You've got to keep going, knocking at those doors. 10 doors will shut in your face, but the 11th door may open. So be persistent. And even when you get the breakthrough, don't rest on your laurels. Don't think, oh, brilliant, I can put my feet up now. You still have to work at it. And that means continuing to write, thinking about writing follow-ups, continuing to publicize yourself, continuing to work with a publisher. Publishers like self-starters. If you're always coming up with ideas, well, oh, I could go and talk about this, or I could do a little blog about that, or I could go to a literary festival, or we could do this event together. They love all that. They love self-starters. So really, I'm afraid to say, despite the romance around this wonderful industry, it's blooming hard work.
It's very, very hard work. And my feeling is that, like many creatives, most creatives, like 80%, I find don't make huge amounts of money. It's a passion project.
It is, and this is something that I struggle with because I teach a little bit of this at Cambridge at the university here with the undergraduates. And there are quite a lot of undergraduates. So these are, without being rude to them, they're basically kids. They're 19, 20, 21 years old. And they've got this burning passion to be a writer, which is great. Lovely. I would never take someone's dream away from them. Your dream is yours. They're sacred. You have every right to them and to follow them. In fact, I tell them to follow their dreams, but there's got to be an element of realism in there as well. Nearly all writers, nearly all of them, will have another job. A lot of them, for example, will be librarians or teachers, something around the world of words, something that provides a stable income so they can do the boring old things like have a house, a mortgage, have food at the end of the day, look after their families. So although it's a hard reality, I always say to people, by all means, aspire to be a writer. It's a wonderful thing. You learn so much about the world. You learn so much about life. You learn so much about people. You learn about yourself. Do it. It's a fantastic thing. But have the safety net, have the fallback plan. If you don't become the next big author, have something which, although you're very happy writing it, maybe it brings you in a useful income, there's something else which makes you think, I can pay the bills, I can still have my house, I can still eat as well. And it's sad to have to say that, but that is the genuine truth. And you might be surprised. I've done events with big authors. Jeffrey Deaver comes to mind, the big American author who's written many well received and very lucrative, selling high numbers of books. And I remember at one event, which was a few years ago, and he said to me, he said, I've never really broken through that place where I feel comfortable. I've never really felt that I'm making enough money that I can relax. That's Jeffrey Deaver, and that's a top-notch author. So just take that as a lesson. Always follow your dream, but just temper it with realism.
And it's you talking like that. I remember hearing an interview regarding Charles Dance, who again, a very successful actor, who hadn't worked for 3 years. It's the same kind of thing, isn't it? It's, and I think that's what many creatives do. Is many creatives have a passion, have a hobby, and might be able to do it full time. If they are full time, then they're probably just about making a living. And then there's people who are hobbyists, who have got another job, who can't quite get established, so that they're not there yet, if you like.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's so long as people are enjoying it. That's why I would say start with the heart, start with you. Why am I doing this? Am I doing this because I want to make loads of money and be famous, or am I doing it because I want to do it? If you can start with the premise, I'm doing it because it's me, you will always be more happy and satisfied. And then if you get some success, well, that's a bonus. That's lovely as well. But start with the you, always about the you.
Thank you ever so much for coming on today, Simon. That's really, really good of you to share your thoughts and insights. I know that a lot of people are going to find that really useful. So once again, thank you ever so much from me and from the Creatives Universe.